Welcome to the Waiting Room Revolution. We're so excited to announce our book, Hope for the Best, Plan for the Rest, 7 Keys for Navigating a Life-Changing Diagnosis is available now in paperback, ebook, and audiobook. Get a copy wherever you buy your books, and check out our website, waitingroomrevolution.com for more information.
And as you say, all those decisions and your values, they influence the care and the treatment you have throughout your whole illness journey. And you mentioned about healthcare campaigns as well. How fantastic. So when we have our breast screening, when we have prostate, whatever we have, how fantastic would it be? Oh, what have you done for your advanced care planning? Is there anything we need to talk about?
That was Clare Fuller, a registered nurse in the UK with a passion for advanced care planning. Clare owns Speak For Me, a lasting power of attorney consulting service. In this episode, we discuss what she's learned from hosting her podcast called Conversations About Advanced Care, and some of the tools she's developed to support people to plan for the future. Hi, I'm Xian Xiao.
And I'm Sammy Winemaker. We talk to people who have information and tips on how to unlock a better illness experience.
The Waiting Room Revolution starts right now. Clare, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's lovely to meet you guys again, and congratulations on the release of your book. And I am so looking forward to reading it.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Maybe you can tell our listeners what it is that you do currently. What is your role?
Yeah. Jan, to be honest, I'm still working on my elevator pitch. So this is a long elevator pitch, but my background is in palliative and end-of-life care, and that's 30 years in the making. And quite unusually, I've worked across all the different sectors. So I started off in a hospice, hugely proud hospice nurse, a specialist nurse. I then moved into the generalist setting, and we were talking a little bit off air as well. And at that point, I realised the importance of taking palliative care and end-of-life care into the general setting, because the vast majority of people, I know Sammy will be nodding, will die in a generalist setting, not under the care of a hospice. Within that role, I also completed my MSc. I spent a bit of time with a company called the Gold Standards Framework in the UK, and that was when they were delivering their hospital programme about recognition of the last year of life and implementing advanced care planning. So all of those different sort of nubs I took and then developed my own company. I had the honour of being able to do this when the children left home. So to answer your question, I now call myself an educator, advocate and coach for advanced care planning. I set up to help organisations improve advanced care planning and end-of-life care, to educate the public. And I also do something called lasting power of attorney, or proxy decision making, I don't know what you call it in Canada, but I'm a lasting power of attorney consultant as well, which has been a really fascinating journey. You know, you start on a journey, you think, yeah, I know about lasting power of attorney, but the more I delve into it, the more court cases I attend, the more I go to the Court of Protection, the more challenges I learn, the more I learn what there is to learn about that fascinating role. So that's the long answer. The short answer is I'm passionate about all things advanced care planning.
What an important topic. If we did that piece better, oh my goodness, we would save people so many, treatment decisions that they look back on and think, I wish I didn't do that. And the heartbreak of people having to make decisions on behalf of someone is really difficult. Yeah. So thank you for that amazing work.
My pleasure. I think I'm so passionate, Sammy, because I've seen time and time again where decisions are left too late. Yeah. And we attend things called mortality reviews in England, in the UK, where we can look back and reflect, what did we do well, what did we do badly? And time again would review the fact that we recognise somebody was dying 24 hours ahead of time, 48 hours ahead of time. And this could be a 92-year-old person with a fractured neck or femur. This is no surprise. We're just not recognising it, and as you say, acting upon somebody's wishes. So lots of catalysts have driven me to where I am now.
And Clare, I mean, a lot of these stories you've recorded in your own podcast, right? Yes. Speak For Me, which our listeners can find on all the platforms as well. And tell us a little bit about that journey of the podcast that's really focused on people's stories, good and not so good, where they didn't, not necessarily, and maybe might have missed some chances to do advanced care planning?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really lovely question to answer. So thank you for asking that one. That's a joy to answer. So that podcast started with the most incredible lady called Clare Fisher. Clare was a very young lady in her 30s who was diagnosed with an unexpected bowel cancer whilst working, I believe she was working abroad, potentially the Cayman Islands. This was an absolute shocking and sudden diagnosis. Clare's job happened to be a public policy professional, and she was very, very interested in well-being. Clare was palliative. Clare was non-curative from the point of diagnosis, and she set about what she called her retirement mission. And that was, if I remember correctly, to improve discussion around advanced care planning, very, very close to my heart, and to encourage early access palliative care and to break down those scary barriers that I know you talk about a lot on your podcast. So Clare was very, very, very much a planner. She was meticulous, she was methodical, and she was organised. Clare had 3 children and 2 twins, and towards the end of her life, Clare was admitted to a hospital in an intensive care unit. And this will be a story that will be familiar to you both as well. And all Clare wanted was to go home. This was going to be her last Christmas with the twins. There was one of the children's birthday coming up. She knew she wasn't going to get better. She just wanted to be at home to die and to spend the remaining Christmas with her children. And she sent out a tweet saying that she was stuck in hospital, if you like. She couldn't get out. She was stuck in intensive care and she couldn't get her wishes heard. And I'd already connected with Clare, and I thought, my goodness me, if somebody as high profile as Clare, if somebody who planned as well as Clare, if somebody had all her ducks in a row, as we would say, all her planning in order, all her paperwork done, all the discussions done, if she had that shout out, how much harder can you imagine it would be for everybody else? So I'd worked with Clare in the past on a couple of projects, which was fantastic. I responded to that tweet and said, Clare, look, would you be happy to share your story? And it was such a privilege just to talk with Clare 3 weeks before she died. And we shared her story just to start raising awareness. And Clare coined the phrase, this is an important conversation about important conversations, which I love. So that was the very first podcast. And I know I'm talking to podcast aficionados here with you and Sammy, but oh my goodness, getting that first release out was tricky. I didn't know about podcast platforms. I didn't know about all the editing. It was a real race to the finish line to get that one out and a huge learning curve. Anyhow, the episode was released, and from that we are now, I think, approaching 61 episodes down. And each episode aims to show a different element of advanced care planning, because people tend to think it's a piece of paper, it's a one-off event, and you can tick it off. Yay, we've done advanced care planning. So each conversation I tried to show this is a different element of advanced care planning. It may be, I spoke with an incredible lady, Vicky, about her daughter's organ donation. It may be about advanced decision to refuse treatment. So each episode focuses on a very, very specific issue. And as you're right, Sian, there are many, many stories within there. So I learn through each of them. It's a real privilege to do, absolute privilege.
That's amazing. You've done so many episodes. Congratulations to you.
It's hard work. Thank you.
Especially on one topic. But as you mentioned before, it's a complicated topic. Clare, I remember when I went to see our lawyer with my husband, and he said to me, and said to my husband, okay, tick box style. Do you want a feeding tube? Do you want this? Do you want this? Do you want all these procedures or interventions? And my husband's like, no, yes, no, like easy for him to answer. And then he got to me and I said, it depends. It depends. And he's like, well, there's no tick box for that. It's either yes or no. I said, well, actually, it's not yes or no. I think it's more important for my husband to know what I value, so that if there is a future time that he needs to make a decision on my behalf about one of these interventions, that he can use my values and things that are important to me and what I wouldn't trade off or would trade off to make the decision in the time that it is relevant. And the lawyer and my husband looked at me like, okay, who brought her? I mean, it is a yes or no.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's those nuances that are absolutely lost on forms, aren't they? I spoke with the delightful Andrew Saunderson about joy lists and learnt so much from a guest. So as part of doing the podcast, it's made me do my own advanced care planning, because it's no good me sitting here and talking in front of my microphone once a week and not enacting
as a hypocrite.
As a hypocrite. And a really big shift, I think, in my thinking touches upon what you're saying, Sammy. And I'd associate it with what we would call an advanced statement of wishes and preferences. So the things that bring you joy, the things that give you value, the things that give you meaning. I'd associated that with something potentially towards the end of life. But I've really upstreamed that. So I've done my own advanced statement, because for me, what brings me joy, my wishes, my values, that underpins the decision making behind all my advanced care planning. So I have done an advanced decision to refuse treatment, which in the UK is a legal document. But through doing that, I made jolly sure that I'd done an advanced statement of my wishes and preferences, because that fleshes out and that explains why I've made the decisions I've made. And should attorneys in my lasting power of attorney need to make decisions, I've not documented them on that form. I've just given people the autonomy to speak for me. Well, they'll know my wishes and values. So the podcast has also helped me immensely with my own advanced care planning, I'd say.
You know, as I'm listening to Clare, and we have listeners from all over, I guess I would just, it reminds me that every country, every province, every state, has a different set of terms and forms and paperwork, and whether or not this needs to be notarized or not notarized. Like you really need, for the listeners, need to learn what is applicable for your own country that you live in. But there are some common threads for all of us, right? This idea that hopefully before you're ever in a pickle with needing to make a health decision, that you have discussions with the people who are closest to you, hopefully one of them being we call it substitute decision maker, or substitute decision maker with power of attorney. Some people call it proxy, whatever, people call it, that person knows you well enough that if they're ever in a position in the future, standing there needing to make a medical decision on your behalf, that they can do that for you because they know you, not what they would want for themselves or what they would want for you, regardless of what we call the papers and the documents and the forms. That the essence of it is that these conversations happen, hopefully in a timely enough manner, multiple times over a lifespan, as just normal conversation, so that you're covered if you ever run into a snag and you can't answer for yourself. I think that's one important common thread. Are there other important common threads, do you think?
Yeah, I'm really interested that you said that, and I wanted to reflect back, and I think you said you highlighted the differences between countries, and it goes further than that as well, which exacerbates the confusion and was another driver for me to do my role as well. So if we just take the UK, or if we even just take England, and we look at towns abutting to towns and hospitals abutting to hospices, within a 5-mile radius, we can have multiple forms. So for healthcare professionals, it's a muddle and a pickle in their heads. For members of the public, that there's no common language for the healthcare professionals, for transporting documents across systems, for interoperability, and that adds to the confusion. So I like how you draw it down to basic principles. So the way that I try and shape advanced care planning is that we have, and it's everything that you're saying, Sammy, we have what matters most as the foundation. And then from what matters most, there are the common themes, I would argue, of the things that you do want. So we would include an advanced statement of wishes and preferences, of joy lists, values. We have things that you don't want. That's another thread. And wherever you live, because it's going to be a different form, but if you know the concept, so what you don't want, an advanced decision to refuse treatment. You have who would speak for you, or a substitute decision maker as another element. And then finally, you have your legacy as well. We touch on digital. So I try and come from advanced care planning as almost forgetting those forms. As you say, it's not the forms, it's the conversations. Have a foundation of conversation. And then no matter what area you're in, you're going to have to work out what forms to use. And to be honest, it frustrates me immensely that we don't have a national repository or a national language or a national system to share this key information.
And, you know, in making it more complicated is that if this isn't done and you end up later in life in a crisis, the flip side is that most clinicians, I'll just speak on behalf of doctors, are going to tend to want to do something. You are more likely to get an intervention than the person sit there in a crisis and say, well, let's weigh the pros and cons of not having this done, because it's a crisis, right? And so it's action oriented. So you're going to end up on a ventilator, or you're going to end up in the ICU. And so we want to avoid, because so many people say, like we said at the beginning, I wish I had known, or I wish I had made a different decision. Or family members say, I wish I knew what this loved one of mine would have wanted. I fear I've made the wrong decision, and it's too difficult for me to say stop the treatment. It weighs heavily on people's shoulders. You've taken on a massive mess, actually, because you're right. Same with Canada, Claire. So don't feel bad about the UK.
Well, that's why I absolutely love your work with you and Sienna, because I'm coming at this from a different angle now. I can't influence the forms. I can't influence this huge system. So if people understand that it's there for them to use, and go to their GPs demanding advanced care planning, asking to have it with the framework that you set out so beautifully. The framework that you suggest isn't a medical framework. This is something that everybody can use. So I wonder if the shift will happen when more and more people go to the GP. And interesting, I work with clients. I'm working with a young couple at the moment who live towards the north of England. I live in the south. And they're trying to do their advanced care planning, had been to their GP, who just looked blankly at them. So they were connected to me via Twitter. So people are going to the GPs who still don't quite know what to do sometimes, because it is so complicated. But I think if we can raise awareness, I often like to say that advanced care planning is a professional responsibility, but a public right. If we can get people saying, look, I'd like you to help with my advanced care planning, maybe that will be the impetus that we need, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's why we're so excited to talk with you, because there is sort of a public perception issue, just like with palliative care. Advanced care planning, the public sort of misunderstands what it is. And I love the stuff that you put out to clarify or better hone in on the key elements. You've sort of deconstructed it into what are the pieces. And I love your metaphor of the house, because that simplifies it. Maybe you can share that with the listeners of just what are the key elements, like what is advanced care planning, because people think it is filling out the boxes.
Yeah, I can give you, if you want to put it in the show notes, but if you take the image of a house, it's exactly how I've described. If you imagine the foundations for a house, the foundations for advanced care planning is simply what matters most to you. And then if you think, if you hold the image of a house in your head and think of the different windows, they're the components of advanced care planning. So the things, an advanced statement of wishes and preferences is one window. And then, yes, you can open those windows, you can open those curtains and go through and complete the forms. But if you just know that there's a window, that's good enough. The next window, if you like to imagine, is the things that you don't want, an advanced decision to refuse treatment. And again, if members of the public just know that that window exists, whichever county, whichever province, wherever they live, they can tap through, open the curtains and get the right form. The other window, if we keep the imagery, is of legacy. Lots of people will think of a will, but I've interviewed some really incredible and gifted people about memorial jewellery or handcasts, or thinking about leaving all of the senses that people can remember, potentially writing letters to people. and hugely important digital legacy as well. So I'm working on my digital legacy. I'm making steps with that. How many of us have got a digital legacy plan? So they're all the different elements. And of course, who would speak for you? Proxy decision maker would be those 4 windows. So if we imagine the foundations, the 4 windows encapsulated under that one roof. And I like to say that if you then imagine trouble comes knocking on your door, you can open the door and you're ready. As Sammy says, we can answer anything because we've got everything set up and ready. And then you can continue the metaphor. You hope for the best, you prepare for the worst. You've got a sun image, you've got a rain cloud image as well. So that really simple image, it's taken me probably 2.5 years to come up with.
Yeah.
But I like it. I like it.
And it's getting your house in order, right? It's sort of
getting your house in order.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes sense to me.
I'm chuckling because I love that imagery. But I'm thinking the trouble doesn't normally knock.
True. Help me with my imagery. It took me 2.5 years for that. Sammy.
No, I love it, and I didn't want to ruin your vibe, but
it's funny.
I'll work on it.
No, I love it, and there's spring cleaning, and every year people read. So every year it's a nice opportunity to refresh, or sometimes you redecorate. Something happens and you want to change. Like that's normal and
I like
healthy.
that.
So, yeah, and stuff changes. So I think getting your house in order is a very accessible way. So that's one of the exciting things, Claire, that I just wanted to say that, for ourselves, like people think the Waiting Room Revolution is this podcast and it's Sammy and me, but we have over time realized it is about going public facing. It is about educating the public, but not just about end-of-life care. It's about what to do early in the disease illness. Yeah. So that's exactly what you're doing. That
or
can
before,
make people,
or before you get an illness is
absolutely
even more upstream than we are, right?
Yeah, great point. Yeah, absolutely. And that is the revolution. And so it's not even just join us. You are already a card carrying member without even knowing it. And so
welcome.
It's amazing. We just so admire your work, and you are in the umbrella. When we think of our future talks where we're like, who are the people who are doing the work of the revolution? You're square in the middle. So it's sure. And that's why there's such a spirit, because it took us a while to really understand, like, what is it that it's because a lot of people focus on either educating clinicians, like explaining ACP to clinicians, and we've been in rooms like that, and that's important, but it's the public who has a right to this information. And if they could take charge and ask the questions, it's their experience. They're the ones who have the most at stake, really.
Yeah. And we need to take this apart, and you've said it, both of you have said it in our discussion just now. We need to move it away from death and dying, because there's a perception that it is to do with death and dying. And on a really practical note, to do a lasting power of attorney in England at the moment takes 20 weeks. It takes 20 weeks from when you send off that form to when it's registered. And 77% of the public think that you can do a lasting power of attorney when you want one, but you've got that 20-week lag, apart from the time it takes to construct, to draft, to sign it as well. So this isn't something that happens at the end. And as you say, all those decisions and your values, they influence the care and the treatment you have throughout your whole illness journey. And you mentioned about healthcare campaigns as well. How fantastic. So when we have our breast screening, when we have prostate, whatever we have, how fantastic would it be? Oh, what have you done for your advanced care planning? Is there anything we need to talk about?
One of the things that we've realized with the revolution is when we go public facing, and we're hoping that patients will ask different questions of their clinicians, we realize we also have to now sort of go back and do education of clinicians a little bit differently, because they're seeing this information in a new way and maybe more plain language, and they're kind of stuck to sort of, how do I answer this when patients say, this is what matters to me, and so how do we use this? They haven't really thought of things in this way. In the same way, when we ask patients to ask about zoom out, what's the beginning, middle, late, and what decisions will I make along the way, we need to also give confidence to clinicians that they actually know this information and need to just position what they know in a slightly different way. So I wonder if in your future work, besides the house framework for patients, if you think there's a piece of your work that will have to be the clinicians understanding how to use this house metaphor and what matters to you in a different, it's the same information, but in a different way, but they're not, they're seeing it in a differently.
Yeah, I'm split when I answer that question, if I'm honest, because there's a part of me that wants to say we're all members of the public. We're all sons, daughters, mums, sisters. And there's a part of me that doesn't want that divide, because I think if we're normalizing it for everybody. So yes, part of me wants to say yes. And the onus is on clinicians to find out the forms to make that framework work, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But there's a part of me that's scared to create a divide to say, well, this is for members of the public and this is for healthcare professionals. So yes, there is a degree of work. We need to know how to access what you've got in your local area. So I suppose it's tweaking that house. So I'll stick with the analogy, but it'll be windows and windows behind. They'll be opening more windows rather than drawing a new house, I think.
Yeah, you know what? I think the analogy there is that clinicians are supposed to be like the real estate agents. Like they have to know how to make this house to talk about it for their local area, right? But they don't. They need to be able to show and explain how this relates in their local context. Really, that's their goal. Their goal is as the coach to show them the rooms and what forms are relevant in this area and what, you know. So it isn't that different. It's a really good answer, actually. I think you're right that in a perfect world, we don't need to overcomplicate this. This is what makes it simple. Is let's just talk about what you already know and maybe sometimes a different way of talking about it makes it easier to act. It makes it more accessible. That's the point, I think.
Well, it's like at the bank when you see the bank tellers. I don't go to the bank anymore, but when I used to stand in line at the bank, they wear buttons sometimes. Ask me about your mortgage, or do you want to plan for retirement? You know what I mean? Why can't all healthcare providers wear a button that says, have you engaged, or ask me about advanced care planning? You know, in Canada, by the way, Claire, you don't need to have if you want to assign someone your substitute decision maker power of attorney for personal care, in Ontario, you don't need to have a lawyer do that, and you don't need to have it notarized, but it needs to follow a certain way of writing it and needs to be witnessed. And we have taken away those barriers so that people can do it themselves. There are templates online for people. So this is again where, you know, countries, places differ. And so I could essentially do a power of attorney right now for someone in my family. If I wanted to assign my daughter, I could download a form, fill it out, have it witnessed, and it's binding. And so there's no time lag, but still, but to your point was really that this whole process of figuring out who you are, what you value, what forms need to be signed, you know, what window do you need to open up, takes time. So these things are not for crisis reactive. No one's going to do this justice in a pickle. So all the more reason why you reinforce that this is done in a calm, timely manner when you're well.
So if I may, I'd like to share and go back to something that Sammy's been talking about. And this really shows advanced care planning way, way, way upstreaming, I think you'd argue. So this is relating to the lady I spoke about slightly earlier in our discussion, Xian, and her daughter called Fee. She was just 14 and had a discussion about organ donation at school. And that's great. I love the thought that organ donation is being discussed in school. And that's one element of advanced care planning. So at just 14, Fee had an advanced care planning discussion with her mum. If anything was happened to me, and who thinks that at 14? If anything was to happen to me, I would like to be on the organ donor risk register. And incredibly sadly, Fee was involved in a catastrophic accident aged just 17. And it was my absolute pleasure, privilege and honour to interview Fee's mum. And she wanted to be on the podcast and she wanted to share Fee's journey. And Fee, because of that conversation, Fee went on to donate, I think it was 5 organs to 5 other people.
Wow.
So when we talk about advanced care planning, having an organ donor conversation at 14 in a fit and healthy young girl, that's advanced care planning, and that's the difference it made. And out of that horrendous situation, Fee's legacy continues. Fee's Foundation has been set up as well. So it's an extreme example, Sian, but it does go to show that this is part of life. This isn't to do with when you become a certain age, this matters to us all and this matters to us now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we were earlier talking about when you don't plan, if you don't think ahead. And I wonder, in your clinical work or even in the podcast, like I feel like, I'm a planner, but I know a
Yeah.
lot of day-to-day people who really don't want to think about the future. And even if you ask, they really are concerned. They're worried to think about too far because, well, frankly, they're very busy dealing with the current, and there's a lot of complexities. And I think, proponents of a palliative care approach will say, well, if you only reach out when you're already overwhelmed and, what we call drowning, it's too late. And yet there's this time. So I guess I'm just curious, what are your strategies for approaching people who are more day to day, and because I don't think it's that they don't understand the value of planning. It's that they don't really know what they don't know,
Yeah.
So I don't know, how do you deal with that in your when you're with your work with as a coach and with other families and patients who are
And I think that's a great point, because a lot of people could be scared or put off, and we've tried to call advanced care planning different things in an attempt to, but none of it works. So my strategy there would be almost to forget the forms, forget the paperwork. They're the secondary bits, they're the coat hangers, if you like. So my strategy there would be really, really simple. What matters most to you? What brings your life joy? What's important in your life? What do you hope to continue? Also work by Professor Max Harvey-Twichnikov as well. When you're looking at dignity therapy and person-centered care, finding out the thing that is most important to a person. We can't ever presume or assume to know. So ask what matters most. We've got the incredible What Matters Most campaign as well, that international campaign. So yeah, that would be my strategy. Forget the forms, find out what matters most to a person.
Are there any podcast guests that you can think about that maybe illustrate this idea that these conversations are powerful and they aren't only about, the treatment decision to be made. There are actually a lot of in-between conversations and meaning making that can really affect people's quality of life for the family or for the patient.
Yeah. If I'd like to reflect on a podcast guest, it would be the incredible Joe Armstrong, whose husband Barry had a glioblastoma, and they had 2 young sons as well. So her advanced care planning, she had the advantage of being a senior physiotherapist, so knowing a bit of healthcare from the inside. And she spoke about all the things that they were able to do as a family because of advanced care planning. And she spoke about the early intervention advanced care planning. So there wasn't this sudden transference to palliative care, very much what you and Sammy talk about. There wasn't a transference to palliative care. It was a side-by-side approach because she fought for it. So she talks about some incredible time that was spent with the husband at home, adapting the furniture, getting the care in place. And her husband, Barry, was a humanitarian aid worker. So part of their advanced care planning was to enable him to receive an award at home that he was too unwell to go and receive. So that's a completely non-medical example of advanced care planning.
Yeah, no, I think it's amazing. And I've listened to your podcast, so many great guests. This is just something on my mind. And I sometimes, we talk to guests because we want to learn, but I wonder if you've seen this sort of common situation where sometimes, well, one of the things that has come out is the tension between, maybe it's not tension is the wrong word, but there are different ways of decision making. So maybe in North American culture, it's more predominant that we ask what the patient wants. But in other cultures, it is a family decision. And there are, even the patient might say, well, I do what's best for the family. There's someone in the family and my 3 kids or my 2 kids, like they will decide what's best. Actually, that's the situation in my family. My father said, if, who will speak for him is me and my brother. We have equal say. And so, we have that shared responsibility. So it's really I don't know if that's common in the UK, that the family dynamics are really what's driving the decision rather than personal autonomy.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm thinking back many years now to many families that I've met in the hospice as well. And I think you touch upon a great point as well. And that's respecting different cultures, different faiths and different beliefs. And there are some cultures that to talk about a situation will invoke that situation. So it's wrong to impose what we think is the right way to do it. So I think what we're talking about is learning from other people, respecting other people's cultures, faiths and beliefs, and working within their systems, finding out the barriers that have been created to enable them to access what they need to access to get the care they need. There's some great work by the No Barriers Here team. I think you've come across them in the No Barriers Here team in the UK. Do some incredible work across cultures, and I would really turn to them for some superb work. They started with learning disabilities, have moved across cultures as well. So some great work I follow from there.
So Claire, here's something that I've seen in many cultures, and I want your opinion. It's often that the caregiver puts their needs last and feels like being a good caregiver means, in some ways, being a martyr, for lack of a better word. And so when they don't have full information about what to prepare for, they end up getting unwell themselves and suffering their own parallel illness journey, especially if an advanced care plan hasn't been done to know what patients want and don't want. And I'm just curious, do you see that in the UK too?
So I think what you're asking, and I use it, and I think you use this phrase, the chapters of an illness. So if we could explain to people the chapters of an illness, and you had an incredible cardiac physician on one of your guests, and she spoke about the beginning, middle, and end stage of cardiac disease. So I think we have we have a responsibility to share. We do know beginning, middle, end stages of disease, and we do have the right, I think, to share that with people as well. And when you talk about, you coined the phrase the martyr position as well. If we can lay out, if we can draw, if we can paint the picture of what's to come, build the support around. So there is some incredible data in the UK. If somebody is wishing to be at home, the vast majority of care will be provided by the family, by the immediate caregivers. It won't be provided by professionals in the vast majority of cases. And unless you plan, unless you prepare, unless you think ahead and get that support in, that one person isn't going to carry it all, so that plan will fail. So the importance of talking and planning to get the social structure and help, the social structure around somebody to help and carry that caregiver through.
Yeah.
We got there.
Yes, we did. No, that was a great answer. And I wonder if you often see people jumping to an action plan, like they're trying to navigate the system and come up with the steps of what to do, rather than taking the step back of going what matters most and the values that drive. Is that, I don't know, a misconception, or is that the missing link to doing it right?
I think in some ways that's a really sad question and a difficult question for me to answer, but I'm going to answer very truthfully. And what I find more and more, and this is in my professional work, clinically through hospitals, and since I've been independent as well, is we talk about steps as if those steps are going to happen to access the steps. But I find there's a gulf between somebody deteriorating and then their wishes being met, and those steps don't even start. So I'll have conversations with somebody, I don't know, for example, in the park, and they'll say, Claire, my dad's been in a hospital now for 3 months after his fall, and he's really, really frail. And I know they're trying to rehabilitate him, but he was having multiple falls before he went into hospital. And I know that he wants to be with mum, and I know she wants to care for him. But they say they're getting him better. So the getting better stories will continue. So what I'd like to say is, we then start the steps. But until we have the conversation and we recognise that somebody's poorly enough, then we don't take those steps to have. So I think that's a very honest but sad answer to your question. And I also realise when I was describing the house to you and Sammy, I forgot one window, and I'm slightly embarrassed because it's an important window. So I described those 4 components, and I can draw it. And
I thought you nailed all 4.
Yeah, no. I nailed the 4, but
one.
There's a little attic window that I didn't describe, and that's in my picture. And how on earth I didn't mention that when you asked me?
Okay, no, let's add it now.
Let's think of those 4 components. There is that other window at the top, which is end-of-life care. And in the UK, we talk about end-of-life being the last year of somebody's life. We talk about potentially the last year, the last month, and the last days of life. And too often care is crammed into the last days of life. So that example I was giving you, walking with somebody in the park, we'd know for a year plus ahead that that person is entering a frail. We'd know for a year that they're entering a trajectory, a downward trajectory. We'd know for months when that person was in hospital. We know for months following the fall. And then it gets to days and there's no plan. So those steps you said, and this is a really long, convoluted answer, what I find time and time again is that we don't get to the point we've had in those steps. The person could potentially die at home, or we have a sudden panic, a sudden pickle, to use Sammy's word, and the wishes aren't met. So that's what I've come across far too often.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. You know what? I think your resources are amazing, and they're all available on your website, which is speakforme.co.uk. And I love the house analogy for advanced care planning. I think it's just brilliant. So if you don't already know, your work is 100% a fit with the waiting room revolution for sure.
So I'm really pleased to have lots of calls from, there are different ways that the resource, so I've built a huge lot of resource for the website, Jan. So I'm really pleased to find the different ways that it's being used. So one example I'd love to share is a GP practice has recently contacted me to say, do I mind if they put some of the info from my website onto those lovely big television screens they have in a GP practice. So I would welcome people to use any of the free resource that I've got on my website, access it, use it, ask me questions. If anybody wants to ask me a question, that could form the next blog. So I'd like to share that.
Love it. People can contact you directly through that website to ask for your individual services. But do they have to be from the UK, or do you work in Scotland? Do you work across the EU?
I work across the globe. So as it's a joy to talk to you in Canada from the UK today, anywhere. I love connecting with people. I love learning from people. So yeah, I welcome anybody from anywhere, either for a conversation or if I can help, I can help.
Clare, it has been so wonderful talking with you.
Clare, you know what? You are the CEO of our revolution.
It's been an absolute honor. Thank you both so much. And thank you for everything that you've taught me. Thank you for inviting me today. I look forward to continuing to join the revolution with you both.
You're joined.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. You can visit our website, waitingroomrevolution.com, to learn more about our movement and how you can join it. The podcast is produced by myself, Kayla McMillan, Valerie Bishop, Shilpa Jyothi Kumar, and Maggie Sivak. Our theme music is Maypole by Ketsa.